This is Jerry Allen interviewing Gloria Orenstein on August 21st, 2010.
In the early 70s, I had my first job teaching women's studies and literature at Douglas College of Rutgers University. And I was also, I have to put my personal story into here a little bit. I was also just divorced, and I had also just finished my dissertation on surrealism. So all these things were going at the same time. And I wanted to make an exciting life for my children, and I took some workshops, and I sort of interviewed myself in the Ira Progoff journal workshop. And I thought, what would I like to do? Even if I couldn't find a job, what would I like to do that would be my passion? And it turned out that I wish I had lived in the 18th century, because I could have had a salon, and I would like to be a salon woman. And I developed that idea, but I just kept it to myself. And 2 years later, I was with a group of women who were reading their poetry, and I just stood up and said, who would like to form a salon? And everybody had said, oh, we've moved to New York to find a salon. There are no salons. And so we decided to form a salon. And that was the exciting thing. We had the first salon in my apartment in New York, and it was about the women of surrealism. And then everyone wanted to have a salon, and we carried books, and we carried all kinds of things all around to different people's studios and different people's lofts, and we had finally a season of salons. And the salons were all on literature. Of course, we had wonderful writers like Kate Millett and Adrienne Rich and all the feminists who read at the salon, and they weren't charging anything in those days. So, we were able to have these fabulous programs. We had a very wonderful, incredible salon, which I say it's a part of like salon history kind of events, because it was sort of controversial and strange, and it was the salon for Judy Chicago's dinner party before the dinner party opened. So all of the women in New York who were on one side or the other of this dinner party event called up, and they all wanted to come, and over 200 people showed up for that salon. We couldn't fit them in the tiny apartment. And we had Kate Millett, and we had Arlene Raven, and various wonderful feminists in New York present. And Judy was being temperamental, and Arlene was cheering her and saying, come on, Judy, do it for the West Coast. And Kate Millett was saying, come on, Judy, do it for the East Coast. And, everybody was having a hullabaloo in that audience. And so that's why we look a little worried and upset. And the equipment wasn't working, and she was very critical of us because the slide projector was having troubles. And, but I say, well, this is the way salons always were historically, that people had controversies and criticisms and disputes and whatever. And then there was a second group that came in. But I'll tell you this for the history of art. We had some salons that were on art. This was one of them. And then there was another one. And one went along with the Women's Caucus when it was in New York. So there was a bus that went around the city, and the women would go to the different art venues. And we decided ours was an art venue, but the art was literature. So the women came in, and they looked at the walls. And Erica Duncan had a lot of art on the wall that her husband had done. He was an artist. And then they started to leave. So we said, wait a minute, you haven't heard anything yet. We have a whole program of readings prepared for you. And then we started to do the readings, and the women burst into tears, and they said, we forgot about the power of words. And it was really interesting how the arts were so separated in those days. Today we have, the interrelationships of the arts and multimedia and all of that. At a certain point, I went with a friend of mine, and we co-founded a big event in Copenhagen for the 1980 Mid-Decade Conference on Women that took place there from the International Women's Year, it was called, from the UN. And it was called the First International Feminist Art Festival, and it was held at the Nye Carlsberg Glyptotek Museum. We got funded by the government to go there, and I brought Audre Lorde for a literary program, and we brought many artists, Betty Saar, many from California, many from New York. And we were so inspired by the idea of an international kind of salon that we came back, and then I founded another salon with a woman named Marcia Miller, who worked with me on that one. And that one was on the multi-arts. So we would hold them in Soho 20, and there would be art on the wall, and then there would be somebody doing a performance from theater. There would be somebody reading poetry. We had many different arts going at the same time. And we had people from California, because we met them in Copenhagen, and they came and did rituals, like goddess rituals. And that was the first time that goddess rituals were done in New York. So that was very much fun. Well, we learned about the women's building from reading about it in Chrysalis and knowing about it from Heresies, the women's groups, the Women's Caucus, and meeting Judy Chicago. But I actually gave a paper at the Women's Caucus, and it met during the year that they had the big exhibit called Women Artists 1550 to 1950 at LACMA, I think, yeah. And when I had to come to that. And I came to that, and my mind was blown. I was just, in awe of what had been done there and this whole history of women in the arts that I began to find out about, because I had only worked on surrealism, and suddenly I saw the whole, history in the West. And then there was something going on at the Women's Building downtown, and it had Eleanor Anton's performance with the boots going into the building, and the whole thing was so extraordinary, creative, fabulous. I wanted to be a part of it, and I didn't have a job out here yet. But soon after that, I lost tenure where I was, and I had to look for another job, and I got the job at the University of Southern California. So I came here in 1982, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of the Women's Building. What we learned about the teaching that went on at the Women's Building was spectacular. We had never thought of reinventing art teaching. We had never thought of pedagogy. All the research that was done on the lost women artists, all that came to us in New York from LA, and that was really pioneering work. Here's one on International Women's Day that we did. So we tried, to celebrate different events, and we tried to have salons on important themes. They were mostly political. They were more political than my salon in New York, because we had one on the role of culture in the new Nicaragua, or on women's, Chicana women, things like that. One of the things that you could see in my salon was that it was really to network for the contemporary feminists so they could find agents or publishers, and that was my idea. And it was sort of like transferring my work into my social life and reframing my social life as my work. I was doing that. So I really thought salons were all about networking, and I was writing this and speaking about it. And then I went to Paris, and somebody said, would you like to meet a real salon woman of the 20th century? So I did. I met this woman named Madame Tézenas, and I spoke to her in French, and I said, oh, can I interview you? Sure. And I said, what was the social goal of your salon? I knew she was going to say something about networking and like that. She said, my dear, I don't think we had any social goal at all. So I was really shocked. And then I said, my gosh, no? She said, what do you mean by social goal? I said, oh, well, so that writers could meet publishers and journalists, and everybody could interact, and they could do this big networking. And oh, I hope, my dear God, that we never had any product come out of my salon. We didn't want any product to be produced. She said, do you know why we had salons, really? And I said, well, tell me. She said, well, we had them because we loved good poetry, good literature, good friendships. We loved good wine. We loved good food. And we loved les agréments de la vie, which means the pleasures of life. And when she said that, I just burst into tears. And I thought, I forgot about the pleasures of life. I mean, I was having pleasure, but that wasn't the goal of my salon. And I thought, I have to change everything. So I've come now to tell you that the goal of salons is really the pleasures of life. And I would read about salons, and these salons had a lot of games, like the surrealist games, poetry games, word games, puns, things like that. And they also would bring like a bear into the salon and put him up behind the kind of screen where somebody was getting dressed, and then she would turn around and there would be a real bear there, and they would get a great kick out of that. Or they would take somebody's poetry and sew it together into a book, and they would write as if it were published and say, look, we've published your book, and it wasn't. They had done this trick on the poet. So they had all these games because they were having fun. And I used to skip the pages. When I'd come to one of those things, I'd flip really fast. I thought, this is not important for me. And suddenly when I met that woman, I thought that was important. They were having fun, and that was part of the reason they had the salons.